Today I have Dr. Lynn Sedgmore CBE joining me. I'm very honoured and privileged that Lynn has agreed to be a guest on today's interview. Lynn has been a long-standing feminist and activist for many, many years, many accomplishments, and so many diverse ways that she is helping others to realise their potential. Lynn, can you tell us a little bit about your work with feminism and with inclusion?
Yeah, absolutely. I became a feminist at 17. That was when I discovered spare rib, and it was the most amazing experience, the issues that they were dealing with. And so I would say I've been an active feminist in different ways since then. So I've been a feminist and manifested that as an activist, certainly in the 70s and the 80s, in all sorts of campaigns and liberation movements, particularly focusing around everything from nurseries to women's writing groups through to, I didn't go to Greenham Common, unfortunately, because I was too busy doing things in Stoke at the time, but different kinds of campaigns, in terms of active movements. I also teach a course, Journey of Feminisms, that chart right through history, right from the very early women who spoke out, including those in Africa, way back, through to first, second, third, fourth wave feminisms, through to intersectionality. I run a goddess-centered leadership program, or I have done, and written a book, Goddess Leadership Wheel, which has a feminist leadership underpinning. I work with charities and do inputs on feminist leadership, because there's a very explicit form of leadership that has intersectionality, has liberation, has inclusion, has gender equality right at the heart of it. It's transformational leadership at its best, but it's distinctly a feminist leadership approach as well. And I run workshops on embodying goddess. I've been involved in the Glastonbury community for the last 15 years or so. And Cathy Jones, its core founder, is also a second wave feminist. And we've grappled with all the issues between fourth and second wave feminists in terms of perspectives. So yeah, feminism, and I was very clear about my feminism as a leader in mainstream. I was a chief exec for 17 years, and I was very explicit about my feminist perspective on leadership.
And I love this, because it's what you bring to this is this real credibility of walking in two worlds. Yeah. And this is a really difficult balance to hold. And I see more and more female leaders in the work that I do working with this, working with their, how do I say, their natural and their spiritual inclinations, along with almost being in those leadership roles because they're called to leadership roles to ensure that leadership is fair, is judicious, and actually is inclusive and gets the right outcomes for everybody.
Oh, nodding dog. Yes.
Yeah.
Everything you've said. For me, work is worship, work is service. I spent 36 years within the further education system, the vocational education in this country. And when I discovered it, I fell into it, actually, as often we do. And it was my home. And I knew that's where I wanted to be. And from that place, what I learned as a poor working class kid off a council estate in a grammar school, I learned that if you were in the top 3 of the class, you could get away with all sorts of things and you could maintain your autonomy. And that's been my kind of guiding principle. So what I discovered, if I really delivered and learned how to play the game, but not in a negative way, it's like, what is it that gets valued here? Then I would have the space to be quirky and different. And, oh, do you know what? You know, she's bitten your face, she's a feminist, but you know what? You want something delivered, Lynn will get that done with teams, etc. So I kind of created the space, co-created it, to be able to be feminist, to be spiritual, to be the things that for me, in order to be an authentic leader, really mattered. They may not matter to other people, and if not, that's fine. I'm not going to push anything on anybody, but to me, to be a truly authentic leader and to bring my whole self into the workplace, I needed to be able to speak about and to live from those principles and values.
And actually to model that, particularly as a leader, when we're creating teams, it's making sure, have I got all of the voices in the room? Have I got the right representation? And, you know, for me, certainly from a technology background, that led to better delivery, better understanding of stakeholder needs.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Diversity is about many things. We often just go gender, race, disability, etc., all of which are crucial and important. But it is also about perspectives and views. When I was dean of a business school, 1990, I think that was, it was all men. I came in as the dean, and all the senior managers were men. Within 6 months, 50% were women. And what they used to say at the worst end is, oh, you see, you've just done that. And I say, what you don't understand is, as a women leader, I look for different things than male leaders. I haven't set a target. I haven't set a thing. I am looking for things that are different. I'm looking for emotional intelligence. I'm looking for an ability to multitask. I'm looking for an interconnected perspective on things. And it so happens that the best candidates who exhibit those things are female at this point in time. So we used to have those discussions, because I mean, again, women in my position, often the only female in a male team, you got loads of barrages of criticisms, constantly looking at you, challenging you. But I would say that's about me looking for different things in leaders than is traditionally in this organization being looked at and for, and valuing it differently.
And I think it's really interesting, because what I see with a number of organisations that I'm working with internationally is they are embracing a new leadership paradigm, which talks about empowerment and autonomy, going back to what you said, of the individuals, not the hierarchy, but the holacracy, which means supporting everybody in how we design our spaces and communities.
Totally. Collaboration. I mean, Peter Drucker of big leadership guru years ago, actually wrote an article.
I remember.
I'm that old, are you? Actually wrote an article saying the future of leadership is female. And I don't want to be sexist towards any man. I've employed brilliant men, and I know men with huge emotional intelligence, but it's that perspective that says, let's collaborate, let's work together, let's do this as a team, let's get the best out of everybody. I remember the days of the superwoman myths, where we're supposed to be able to do it all, whereas now it's how do you complement each other? And in that sense, I think things have moved on, and it's very different now. So in the best organizations, it isn't that gender is completely irrelevant, but it isn't a battle, and it isn't a fight. And it's much more about, we've all got gifts and talents. We are all human beings. We all have strengths. We all have weaknesses. Those rigid stereotypes that from the 50s and earlier were in place have lessened in some areas, so that you can be seen more as a rounded person, bringing everything that you have into the workplace.
Absolutely. But I think in other areas, we still see there is an awful lot of work to do, because, as you've spoken about, your background being working class from Potter is my own background. I'm working class from the northeast of England, and seeing the challenges that people grew up with there. Now, vocational education was a lifeline for some people. It did not fit the traditional mold. And I myself, I started through apprenticeship, and I was just incredibly lucky to then take the routes and be given the opportunities that came. Unfortunately, and I think one of the things obviously that, the last 5 years has brought home, is there is still, whilst there's organisations doing the right thing, there is still great inequality in a number of organisations, in a number of regions, through how government works. I mean, if I look at, for example, at the moment, the political system at the moment, you look at certain institutions, certain universities are still responsible for creating the people that hold the power. And I'm seeing this not just from UK perspective, from an international perspective. And I wonder, what does it take to change that? In fact, I've just challenged an organisation I'm working with this week on the diversity of their boards. They're an overseas organisation, and what I see a lack of females. I see a lack of different ethnicity. And that's really quite concerning, that we're so far into this journey from, as you say, first wave feminism was, 60 years, 70 years now, to where we are now. And it still seems that despite social media, the penny hasn't dropped.
Yeah. Do you know, if we had the answer to that, we could bottle it and be millionaires, probably. That's, and I mean that, genuinely, because I have spent years and years saying, after so many initiatives, after legislation has been passed, why have we still not got equal pay between genders? Yeah. Why are working class, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, a professor has just written how working class pupils are still incredibly disadvantaged within schools and within our educational system. So for years, I mean, I was fighting in 75 while I was at university for the Equal Pay Act and the 7 demands of the women's liberation movement, and we still don't have it. For me, it comes down to people. It comes down to really wanting it and believing it, to understanding how you use power and where you give it away. But most people, unfortunately, need to hold on to power. So it's as if when people give lip service, but don't really do it, I have created boards where it has had a really clear, diverse from various angles on it as a board when I've been chief execs, because we've been committed to it and it's been prepared to take back. There is something about a lack of will, and whether it's because we're still fundamentally a patriarchal society and a dominator hierarchy mentality. I'm very involved in the teal movement of how do you move beyond dominator hierarchies and the downside of consensus, which can take forever. I don't know the answer, and I wish I did. It's people not really wanting to make a difference, because nothing can stop us if we really want to do it.
And it's interesting because your point, as you mentioned, on the Equal Pay Act, there's never been a case enforcing it. Likewise, the gender pay gap, it was published, and I went to a briefing. I won't mention which legal firm it was with, but it was when I was chairing the Women's Network. And I studied law, I read through the legislation, I said, and what happens if? What's the sanction that this proves that, there's no sanctions, so it's a toothless tiger. Looks great because the legislation's there, but actually it's a blunt instrument.
And I've just, if I go to autism, because I'm just doing a level 2 in understanding autism, because one of my granddaughters is autistic. And there's a piece in The Guardian today, which is saying how autistic children in schools are not being served well at all. It really lists all the problems. Well, there was an Autism Act in 2006. So legislation has never ensured that things happen. It's more the spirit of, do you want to make it happen? And I think it's tensions that pull away. For each section or sector that you look at, or organization, it's what are the tensions that are pulling you away from doing these things? But my experience is, if you really want to do it, it is doable.
And I love this, the power of this with voluntary, volunteering to do something that doesn't need to be done. I think the best case that shows this is what we're seeing with climate change. It was voluntary to do the reports up until they changed the governance codes in the US a few years ago. It is now mandatory, but good companies are doing it anyway. And they are being challenged for that transparency. They're being challenged on, okay, if you're saying you're doing this, now that we have, if you like, citizen journalism, is this correct? Is what you're saying doing matching the reality? And so I think it's really important for individuals to realise, as we're talking about inclusion, that actually they have more power and they have more voice than they potentially believe they have.
I think that's true, and that's what a lot of my work is with women. Is you know, I've got a power model in my Luminary book that's you know, interpersonal power, transpersonal power, you know, resource power, the more traditional things, expertise power. But I always start with what's the power from within and what blocks that. And I'm not saying, I mean, I've had loads of challenges in my life. It isn't like I've just, you know, wandered through like sweet pea on Popeye, like everything's just been hunky-dory, because it hasn't. Lots of challenges, lots of attacks, etc., etc. But I don't know. I also study the Enneagram. I'm an Enneagram type 8. So we are an 8.
I'm an 8 as well.
So we're the doers, the pushers, the challengers. You know, we actually get a lot of energy out of doing that, which other types don't, which I now understand. But it's empowering people to say, I can do more than perhaps I thought I could. But it's also, I mean, it's also profit. I mean, if you look at, I mean, the core base of capitalism is on a certain group of people getting profit over others. It's dominator hierarchies. It's about exploitation. You know, my new book, Presence Activism, it focuses on climate anxiety, but I'm also looking at, you know, they're not doing anything because it's about profits in the short term. And I'll never get my head around how somebody can be worried about profits in the short to long term when the planet's dying. We might not even be here. But okay, they'll go off and live in Mars or a bunker in New Zealand or something. So there's something about what's the place of your ego in relation to how you serve the world and a greater good, or don't want to sound pious, but, you know, generally the greater good of us all. Or your ego is still at the stage where you're needing to pull in for your own need of greed or whatever. And I think until that shifts, people are still kind of too much wanting things for themselves. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think there does need to be a shift from looking at the individual, the rise of the individual, which is what we've seen in the West, to perhaps the more collectivist. Is what we're doing having a societal benefit? I mean, I always make the argument with businesses, shouldn't be in business unless that business is doing something that's serving humanity. Now, that might be that we like ice cream. Nothing against that. If that's what you want to do and it makes people happy, good. But we've got to not have the costs in the wrong places. And actually, the costs that are not recompensed, when you talk about exploitation, we see this through global trade, the advantages of global trade, which actually means that actually in one country you're paying a substantially lower wage than would be acceptable, and it totally does not follow, you know, the theoretical model of equilibration. It's not the same when everybody's not getting the same opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it needs a shift. You know, I'm also interested in spiral dynamics where, you know, you look at the value memes throughout the ages, and we're in the orange meme of the kind of individualistic, and it brings good things too. Each stage brings, you know, movement forwards or whatever, but then it's got a downside as well. Whereas the green meme is much more about the collective we, doing good for everybody.
Yeah.
And I mean, on the positive side, I mean, I meet so many young social entrepreneurs, you know, everything from if it's toilet roll paper or different products, where younger people, I think, come forward and they're saying, well, I want to make profit, surplus to make a good living. and I want to give back. So X% of all the profit goes to animals or climate change or a good cause somewhere else. So I've been thrilled by the social entrepreneurialism that I think a lot of young people are showing, because to them it isn't an either or. It's like, I can make a good living and I can make a contribution to particular causes, etc., etc. And I do now. I'm lucky. I've got a good pension and things. So in my older age, I can afford to pay more for products because they are contributing back in some way, and they're very explicit about that and tell you how much they've given each year, etc. So I think the rise of that kind of social entrepreneurialism is wonderful. Yeah,
and I think we do see more millennial companies are looking at things like B Corp and accreditations like this to make sure. And what I really valued recently was seeing, obviously, UK government actually is moving to taking on board social impact recognition when they're awarding contracts. And I think that begins to level the playing field by recognising, finally, it's not purely about profit, but it's about purpose and about what we're doing to the planet.
If Glastonbury's, I chair the Glastonbury Town Deal, and we've had 25 million from the Levelling Up Fund, the Town Deal Fund. We wouldn't have got our projects through. We had all community-based, grassroots-led community projects. People going, oh, they'll never fund that. They funded it because we've made the social value argument. And that was in the mix. And you're right. So I totally agree with that. And Glastonbury's benefiting from that social value. And we're upskilling in the community. People are learning to do different things, as well as the capital projects, because it's all capital. Yes, we're renewing those buildings, but it's much more than that. It's helping the community groups to up their game in different ways, to provide services into the community, to provide employment, to improve tourism, for economic prosperity. But so I agree with you on that.
And it's also it's the health, actually. It's the mental esteem, it's the well-being, and everything that comes from being a thriving community.
Yes, and one of our projects is a well-being and health centre, and that will offer services, because our job is to get the buildings ready, and then what people do in them is then up to community groups and the local council and others to do that. But you're right, and there's so much excitement about that health and well-being centre.
So Lynn, one of the things, obviously, that you're celebrating the first International Women's Day. Tell us a little bit about that, because I'm sure those listening would love to hear about this.
Well, I was in London at the time. I lived in Croydon for 17 years. So I was based, no, I wasn't. I was still in Stoke then. I didn't come till 82, actually. So it was in London, and it was, I used to come down every year, and then I moved there in 82. And what would happen is we would all put things on to celebrate. So you were usually part of a feminist group in an area or whatever. So we claim the nights, women's festivals. In Stafford, we used to do film festivals. We would have literature things. We would be having women-only discos, because to do women only at that time, with the first International Women's Day and before and afterwards, it was a big thing to be doing. That there was a women-only club in London that you could go to, and you got your little card. There was Sisterite in London, so that period in the 70s, late 70s, mid to late 70s, mid 80s was a time of, we celebrated huge festivals, music, dance, food, sharing. It was all about, for the first time, coming out of the consciousness raising groups. Fat is a feminist issue. I remember when Susie Orbach's work. So there was a time when I was in something like 17 women's groups simultaneously. So what we were doing was celebrating being women in that first time, that first International Women's Day. It was recognizing for the first time we had a Women's Day. It was about us. It was, who are we? What are we? And we manifested it through different ways: protests, celebrations, cultural things. it was just acknowledging. I just loved it. Honestly, I've still got a lot of nostalgia for those days because it was all so new and it just felt we could change the world. We believed we could change the world. Women's Press, Virago was going strong. It was just an amazing time of we will change the world. We will smash the patriarchy. Well, didn't quite do that, did we? But basically, there was a level of hope. I write about that in my new book. There was a level of hope and a level of possibility. And a Women's Day then was that it had never been held before. I think it had in different ways, but it wasn't this international focus, particularly in the West. So it was, things can be different. And how youngsters cope these days, I think it's a very different context that they're living in terms of what the future holds or not.
Yeah, now that is interesting, particularly for young women and girls growing up, as they say, through social media, peer judgment, as well as the male judgment. That is such a big issue. But then on the flip side, I also look at, and I'm still hopeful, and perhaps, being located in London, we spend a lot of time at places like the Tate, and you see things like the challenge that the Tate are doing in terms of female artists with promoting the work of the Guerrilla Girls. Yoko Ono's exhibition at the moment are all fabulous statements that actually are giving those messages. I have 3 daughters myself, and they're growing up seeing, yes, we see one side and we see what society is telling us, but also we see our potential. We see that we can question. And actually, the positive side is social media, is they can be creators. Yeah. So they've seen and they've witnessed me publishing books, beginning to do a podcast, and their excitement over things like that we can have voice. I'm hopeful for the generation of girls coming up.
I am. Yes, no, I am. And they, what I love when you have conversations with young people about transgender issues.
Yes.
You're so open. It's like, what's the big deal from the percent? I mean, it's a big deal. I'm not diminishing it. But it's like, we just accept people like that. Yeah, you can be whatever you want to be, determine that. And it's not done in a flippant way. It's done in a genuine, what's your sexuality or what? There is an acceptance and an expansion in their minds of things that were so difficult when I was younger, or so traumatic, or so bigoted against. I mean, it still exists, but there is an open-mindedness, I think, in the young people I meet. I'm not going to meet probably people who were in different ways, but it's more accepting of things that we had to fight. When I tell my grandkids, we had to really fight for some of that. They're like, oh, really? Oh, why would anybody not just be accepting of that? So I'm incredibly hopeful. And, I think there's a 5th wave, or call it what you like, of feminism coming. I don't know what it is. I always pose that question in my courses. It's like, is there a 5th wave? What is it now? How would we articulate where we're at now? And that's got to be eco-based, and ecofeminism is around for many, many years. Women writing on that, Greenham was about that. So that ecofeminism has been a strand all the way through. But of course, with climate peril and climate anxiety, I think it's got a new focus in there. Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because particularly, the last few weeks, Body Shop's been in the news, and I can remember for me, that was formative. Anita Roddick's books, it probably inspired me in some way on the entrepreneurial journey, that women can do this, that we can create from a kitchen table. And I do see, I think that next wave, it is about inclusion, it is about eco, but it's also about individuals beginning to create in greater velocity what they need and the lifestyles that they need that are supporting and sustaining
Oh, I totally agree with that. And you know, and honestly, from the bottom of my soul, or the depth of my soul, I want that to be true for women, everybody, but particularly for women, because there's a liberation in that. There's a individuality in that, that can also involve service and giving back. But there's a freedom of expression in that, because I think for many women, way back, it was the constraints that were placed on us that were the most damaging and diminishing. We couldn't be the fullness of our individuality. And we come in all shapes and sizes. You know, there is not a homogenous group of women. We're all different, with all different backgrounds. So yeah, I think that's something that I really wish for everybody. Yeah, women.
And I think it's also not just the difference, but even as we go through our own life cycle, we are different women at different stages of life.
Yeah,
we have different gifts.
My favorite is crone, I tell you.
Yes, I'm coming into that. I'm loving it.
Well, I'm 68, so I'm proper crone.
But it's and you know, I really value, you know, those what I love about where we sit now is, you know, we have this incredible wisdom of women like yourself who've been there from the very beginning. You've got those that have grown up through the 80s and the 90s with for us, inclusion, it was a thing. We've grown up with okay, they're different, and we accept that because we know that that is the right way to be, even in the face of some of the changes we've seen. And then our children, as they're growing up, are coming with this real embracing and anything is possible attitude. Yeah. And, you know, I think, you know, the paradigms are shifting. They're just shifting slowly. It's not the big jump that everybody thinks it's going to be. It is more, and it's only by conversations like this and giving voice to these ideas and the leadership work that you do and the leadership work that so many of us are doing to really get people to question their values, to question their reasons, right? It's great to be a leader, and everybody might want to be a leader, but you've got to be leading something. It's got to be from an A to a B, and there's got to be a transformation occurring. Yeah. We've got to take the responsibility for what that's going to be and what we're going to co-create. So, absolutely.
And having run the Goddess Luminary Leadership Wheel for I think 4 or 5 years now, I still cry every time, you know, because what you see is women really understanding that they can be a leader, because I believe in leaderful. We're all leaders. It's just how and being clear what it is. But then they do step up in ways, and it's from their true, authentic self, and it has a flow to it. It's not forced or I should. You know, it's when you drop all those shoulds and oughts, and it's like, and the first thing they have to do is get rid of all those old-fashioned, patriarchal, out-of-dated notions of what leadership is, because there's still a lot of it around. But actually, when the light bulb moment comes, and it's like, they get it. I can be the kind of leader I want to be. I was born to be, that is not selling my soul, that is not being all those negative male images. And I just love that moment, because once they've got there, everything that you're saying can flow from there. Yeah. And I love that moment. That's what I do the work for, really. Those aha moments of watching somebody like, yeah, I can be the kind of leader that I was born to be. I don't have to sell my soul. I don't have to be like him. I don't have to be like her. Oh, wow, watch this space. And then they start to populate that space from that understanding. I love it. Yeah.
It is joyous. So thank you so much for your insights today. If you had one message that you want people to take from this, Lynn, I know I'm putting you on the spot, what would that one message be?
Really do the work to understand and know who you are, what really matters to you, what makes your soul sing, and how you can manifest your true service in the world. Yeah, that's unique to you. but it makes your soul and your heart sing. Yeah.
Really, really powerful. Thank you so much.
No, it's great. Lovely to meet you. Yeah. Great that you're doing this. Thank you. I think it's really a really important thing to do, which is why I wanted to be involved. And thank you for inviting me. Really, really pleased. Really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Really appreciate making the time, and I'm sure we'll get some wonderful feedback. And of course, we'll share your links when we publish.